The departure boards at Terminal 3 still flicker. Gate after gate, the same word. Cancelled, not delayed, not rescheduled, cancelled. The duty-free corridor that once moved 95,000 passengers a day now echoes with the sound of ventilation systems cooling empty shelves. The perfume testers are still there. The whiskey bottles are still aligned. Nobody is buying anything. Dubai International Airport was, until very recently, the busiest international airport on the planet. Not the busiest in its region, not the busiest for a specific route, the busiest on Earth. In 2023, it processed 86.9 million passengers, more than Heathrow, more than JFK, more than any other single hub in the history of commercial aviation. That number was not an accident. It was the product of 4 decades of calculated, relentless, extraordinarily expensive positioning. Dubai did not stumble into becoming a global crossroads. It engineered that status, terminal by terminal, airline deal by airline deal, subsidy by subsidy, and now, in 2025, that engineering is being tested by forces it was never designed to withstand. We are going to trace the collapse through 4 levels: the flights that have stopped, the infrastructure that assumed they never would, the financial architecture underneath that infrastructure, and the single, uncomfortable question about what happens when a hub loses its reason to exist. If you leave now, you miss the part where the numbers stop being abstract. The kind of person who watches this to the end already knows that official narratives tend to arrive about 18 months after the actual turning point. Stay for the turning point. Emirates Airlines carried 51.9 million passengers in the financial year ending March 2024. That figure represented a post-pandemic recovery that looked, from the outside, like proof that Dubai's model had survived everything the world could throw at it. The airline posted record profits. The terminals were full. The tourism numbers were climbing. Sheikh Ahmed bin Saeed Al Maktoum called it the strongest performance in the airline's history. What he did not say, and what the earnings report buried in footnotes, was that load factors on certain long-haul routes had begun to compress in ways that historically precede capacity cuts. The planes were full. But they were full because the seats had gotten cheaper. Revenue per available seat kilometer, the metric that actually tells you whether an airline is healthy or just busy, had started to flatten. Emirates was selling volume to protect the appearance of momentum. That is a different business than the one it was running in 2019. Then came the regional shock that no financial model had fully priced in. The escalation of conflict across the Middle East through late 2024 and into 2025 did not just affect travel sentiment. It rerouted the invisible geometry of global aviation. Insurance premiums for flights through airspace adjacent to active conflict zones tripled in some cases. Several European carriers quietly suspended routes not because Dubai itself was dangerous, but because the flight paths in and out had become actuarially uncomfortable. flydubai lost 8 scheduled European destinations between October 2024 and February 2025, not announced in a single press release. Removed from booking systems quietly, one by one, on a Tuesday, on a Thursday, on the kind of day when nobody is paying attention. What does a gate look like when the airline using it stops flying? For the first 2 weeks, it looks almost normal. The signage stays, the ground handling equipment stays. The staff report for shifts that have no flights assigned to them yet. Then the equipment moves to another gate. Then the signage is replaced with a neutral placeholder. Then the gate goes dark. There are currently, by the most recent count available from airport operations data, 23 gates at Terminal 1 and Terminal 2 that have entered some version of that cycle. Not all are completely dark. Some are in the middle of it. Gate 114, Gate 207, Gate B 19. If you walked through those corridors today, you would notice the absence before you could name it. The air feels different when nobody is moving through it. Even airports breathe. Here is the question you should be asking yourself right now. Not about Dubai specifically, about the logic of hubs in general. If the entire strategic value of a transit hub is that it sits between other places, what happens when the places it sits between stop trusting each other? Does the hub become more valuable as a neutral zone? Or does it become the place nobody wants to fly through because the turbulence is too close? Leave that question open, because the answer depends on which layer of the system you are looking at. The duty-free operation at Dubai International is managed by Dubai Duty Free, a government-owned entity that generated $2.1 billion in sales in 2022. $2.1 billion. From a single airport. That figure made it one of the top 3 airport retail operations on Earth by revenue. The business model depended entirely on one thing: transit passengers with time to spend. The average layover at Dubai was between 2 and 4 hours. Long enough to walk the retail corridor, short enough to feel like spending money was a better use of time than sitting at a gate. That behavioral sweet spot, 2 to 4 hours with credit card in hand, was not an accident of scheduling. It was the product of deliberate route design by Emirates and flydubai, who built connection times specifically to funnel passengers through the commercial zone. Every dirham spent on perfume at gate B22 was downstream of a decision made in a route planning office 18 months earlier. When flights disappear, that behavioral sweet spot disappears with them. The remaining passengers are not transit passengers. They are origin and destination travelers. They arrived for a reason, and they are leaving for a reason. They do not browse. They walk straight to their gate. The retail corridor that was designed for the restless transit passenger, the person between places with 40 minutes to kill, becomes a corridor that those people no longer have a reason to walk through. Dubai Duty Free has not published 2025 numbers. That is itself a number. Tariq Al-Mansouri worked the electronics section of the duty-free concession for 11 years. He knew the rush patterns by feel. He knew that the 14 to 17 window produced 30 to 40% of daily electronics revenue because that was when the long-haul connections banked. He knew which products the Indian business traveler preferred and which ones the East African leisure traveler always stopped to consider. He had built his professional life around understanding a very specific kind of human moment, the moment when a person is between home and somewhere else and briefly feels flush enough to buy something they do not strictly need. In January 2025, his shift roster was cut by 40%. The explanation was operational restructuring. The real explanation was that the 14 to 17 window had lost its density. Meanwhile, in the infrastructure layer underneath all of this, a project that was supposed to define the next chapter of Dubai's aviation dominance is sitting at approximately 60% completion. Al Maktoum International Airport, positioned 37 kilometers south of the current hub, was designed to eventually handle 260 million passengers per year. That is not a typo. 260 million. The ambition embedded in that number is staggering even by Dubai standards. The project has been under development in various forms since 2010. The original completion date was 2027. It has since been revised. The revised date is 2034 for Phase 1, which raises a question the government has not publicly addressed. What is Dubai International supposed to do between now and 2034? Absorb a declining transit market with aging infrastructure while the new airport remains a construction site in the desert? Or quietly begin consolidating operations in ways that accelerate the very decline they are trying to manage? The infrastructure bet here is not small. The total investment committed to Al Maktoum is estimated at $35 billion across all phases. That money was committed against projections of sustained growth in global aviation traffic through 2040. Those projections were built before the regional conflict escalation, before the insurance rerouting, before the quiet disappearance of 23 gates from active rotation. A $35 billion infrastructure bet is only as good as the demand assumptions underneath it, and the demand assumptions underneath it have started to move. Sarah Chen, an aviation finance analyst based in Singapore, published a private briefing note to institutional clients in March 2025 that circulated more widely than intended. Her central argument was precise and unsettling. She wrote that Dubai's vulnerability was not to a single catastrophic event, but to a gradual erosion of the transit multiplier. Each route suspension reduces connecting traffic, which reduces retail revenue, which reduces the commercial subsidy to aeronautical fees, which makes the hub slightly less attractive to airlines considering new routes, which produces the next round of route suspensions. She called it a demand spiral in slow motion. The phrase that got the briefing shared beyond its intended audience was this one: the spiral does not announce itself. It just accelerates quietly until the numbers make the case that nobody wanted to make. This is the part where the argument reaches its most consequential point. Not what is happening to one airport, what is happening to the logic of strategic hubs as a category. The post-war aviation system, the one that emerged after 1945 and consolidated through the 1980s deregulation wave, was built around the premise that certain locations had permanent geographic advantage. London, New York, Singapore, Tokyo, Dubai, in the 1990s, inserted itself into that list through an argument about geometry. It sat within 8 hours of 2/3 of the world's population. The A380, built partly around Emirates' growth, was the physical embodiment of the belief that this geometry was durable, that the world would continue to need a crossroads in the Gulf, that the crossroads would always be Dubai, that 8 hours of reach was a permanent strategic asset rather than a feature of a particular era in global trade and political alignment. What if it was always an era? What if the geometry is still true but the trust underneath it has shifted? What if you can still reach 2/3 of the world from Dubai in 8 hours, but the political friction of doing so now costs more than the convenience is worth? The perfume testers are still on the counter at gate B22. The bottles are aligned, the lights are on, the air conditioning is running. Everything is in place, except the one thing the entire system was built for. Is the silence in Terminal 3 a temporary disruption waiting for the next recovery cycle? Or is it the first audible evidence that a city bet its identity on a logic that is now being quietly dismantled, not by a single crisis, but by the slow realization that the world reorganized around it while the departure boards were still blinking green? If you have been watching this channel, you already know we do not accept the first answer as given. Like this video if you believe the numbers deserve more scrutiny than the official press releases allow. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be part of the community that reads the footnotes before the headlines arrive. Share this with someone who is still planning their next layover and has not yet done the math. We are not here to alarm. We are here to see clearly before the picture becomes undeniable to everyone else.